were kind of dilated and his ears were kind of flattened. And I immediately knew he had some weird thing in his mind going on. I just looked at him and said, no. And he jumped at me and tried to bite me in the throat. And I grabbed onto his throat to keep his mouth away from my neck. And he was fully clawed. So he dug his claws in and into me. And he was winning the match. He was pulling his own self.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And then so mountain lions and a lot of big cats, they do this next thing. If they can't bite you, he started to try to pull his back feet up and try to gut me.
Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I am your host, Byron Pace, and this is a Modern Huntsman production. This is the second show of 2023 and episode 221. We have some amazing episodes due to release in the coming weeks, including an extension to the Swarovski Optic Living with Nature series, which I always get lots of comments about, which is awesome. So we're extending that by another 3 episodes. If you want to go back and listen ahead of time before we get into the next part of the series, then go back to the second half of last year, look for Living with Nature, and you will find half a dozen episodes. We've tweaked the questions a little, but the ethos is still the same. People in the great outdoors and how they get joy in their lives from nature. The first 2 guests have been confirmed. First up will be Gloria Goney. She's an amazingly talented photographer from Montana and seems to spend more time fishing, hunting, and adventuring than pretty much anybody I know. She also contributed to an article with Amanda Monti as a photographer in Volume 10 of Modern Huntsman. And Jim Murray has also been confirmed for the series. Jim is a friend who is also an actor. You probably know him better as playing Prince Andrew in The Crown. He's an avid fisherman and an awesome human being, and I can't wait to have him on the show as well. All of that is to come, but on this show, I sat down with Casey Anderson, or Grizzly Guy, as he is known on his social platforms. He is a naturalist and filmmaker, creating shows as a producer and host for National Geographic, the BBC, and Discovery Channel, to name just a handful. He runs a wildlife sanctuary in Montana and offers an intimate insight into captive wildlife, the good and the bad. From an analysis of anthropomorphizing animals to the death of the famous P-22 mountain lion and nearly being killed by a cougar himself, it really is a captivating discussion with a man who has lived an amazing life. But before we get into that, don't forget to check out Volume 10 of Modern Huntsman. That is the latest volume that was released right at the end of last year. It has the front cover, which is a view from inside the ribcage of a muskox while a wolf is eating it, taken by the brilliantly talented Ronan Donovan, who also has an article in there about wolves, with Rob Green, who wrote a story about grizzly bears in a previous volume. Just so many incredible people involved in the production of those. So if you happen to be a new listener and you've no idea what I'm talking about, there is a host of old episodes that has Tyler Sharp in them. He's the editor-in-chief of the volume, and we very regularly interview people who have written stories within the book. But head over to modernhuntsman.com and you can read all about the publication. A big shout out to the Patreon supporters for this week, who in the top tier include Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of RD Contracting, James Marchington, the guys at South Ash Stalkings, Dick Ekströmer, and Mark Zabrowski. Thank you so much for your support. And to everybody who supports in every tier of the podcast, you help make these shows possible. If you would like to support these shows, head over to patreon.com/Byron Pace. And lastly, I'm extremely excited this week. I feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders because I finished the edit for my feature documentary, Paid in Blood. As I'm recording this, I'm uploading the file to Dropbox to put in front of the people who are doing the sound scoring and who are going to be doing the coloring and all of the sound design. So that is the next phase, which is going to take probably the next 2 months. And then we'll be trying to work out a rollout plan for a release. But I'm very excited to bring that to everybody. We are still trying to raise funds to pay for the last piece of production, all those things that I've just listed out. I needed to raise $30,000 and we're in the region of about 17 right now. So a little way to go. If you would like to read more about the project, head over to byronpace.com, and then in the menu you will find films, and in films you will find Paid in Blood. There's a whole page and a trailer on there you can go and read, and you can very easily donate to the post-production process with a button at the bottom. Or if you want to reach out to me and speak specifically about what we can do, there is a contact form on the website, and I'll be happy to chat to you. Casey, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm so pleased to have you on. Just before I hit record there, you were saying that you'd done some conversions for me. Conversions of temperature, that is, because you are speaking to me. I'm assuming you're in Montana, right? Where you're from
I'm
right now?
at home at Montana.
Yeah.
So this morning,
how cold is it?
When I woke up this morning, I was surprised because we had this Arctic air mass kind of dip down from the north. It's negative 30 Celsius right now, ambient temperature, with the wind chill of minus 45. So it's cold.
The only time I've been in temperatures as low as that was I was in Svalbard a few years ago, and it was, I don't actually know what the wind chill was, but the temperature was minus 25. But it didn't feel like I'd felt colder because it was so dry. But yeah, that is cold. You can't take your gloves off for very long at minus 25.
No, you can't. No, I like to go out into it, and there's something about just going out and feeling the extremes of what the planet can give to us. But yeah, I'm with you on that, though. I've been colder, too. It's one of those things. I think it's that wet cold. And there's places in the Midwest of the United States, like around the Great Lakes region, and it's not quite as cold, but that sticky humidity that's still in the air, that just is like the factor that takes it to the next level.
Yeah, that's Scotland. It's like only it's been minus 5. It's actually warmed up. It's crazy. It's gone from minus 5 centigrade to 10 degrees plus in the space of 48 hours. But that wet minus 5 is bitter.
Torture. It's torture.
Yeah, like through your bones. Now, we narrowly missed meeting up in person. It can't have been this year. It must have been last year when I was passing through Bozeman. I think we were going to be in the same place. You were away somewhere like for one day, and then we couldn't quite hook it up. But I'm pleased to be speaking to you. Even if it is remotely and not in person, which would have obviously been better.
Yeah, likewise. Well, we'll cross paths again. I'm sure I have a chance to do it in the future. Let's hope so.
Oh, I'm sure we will. I think we're probably only one or two people removed from like a friend of a friend or whatever. And it was funny because you'd been on my list of like, I need to reconnect after bouncing emails back and forth and actually make this podcast happen. And I was at my parents' house visiting, who don't live all that far from me. And I was in the kitchen and my dad shouts through. He says, "Hey, Byron, come through. There's a program on the TV about grizzly bears in Montana." And so I walked through there and it was your face on screen and you were talking. And I said, I'm podcasting with him pretty soon. I said, we've been trying to hook this up for a while. He says, you got to be joking. I says, yeah. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, shit, I need to just find the last email I sent to you and like, let's make this happen.
Great. No, I'm glad you did. I mean, yeah, I'm a fan of the podcast. And so, I'm stoked to be on it.
Yeah, I think that was a Smithsonian. I don't know what the series was, but I think it was a Smithsonian channel that he was watching.
Yeah, I think that's was a program that just came out last year called Growing Up Grizzly. It's about kind of this exploration into captive bears and, whether you should rescue them or not, if they're orphaned in the wild or let nature take its course. Kind of an interesting program. Yeah, it's something I wanted to kind of tackle and kind of spell out to the audience, like kind of some of the decisions that we have to make sometimes and how complicated they are and difficult. And there really is no right answer, so I just kind of wanted to do a film that kind of showed all those nuances and let the audience kind of figure out how they feel about it.
Was that a film that your company produced?
Yeah, we did. Vision Hawk Films, my company. Yeah, we decided. Yeah, it was something I talk about a lot. It was just one of those things, and and it's something that I'm always evolving with. I guess a little bit. Like I changed my mind about things quite a bit over the last 20 years, and continue to change my mind. And I just thought it'd be an interesting film to make. Let's kind of. It's the elephant in the room a lot of the times when people come up to me and know that I have a grizzly bear sanctuary, and the irony is I am pretty anti-captive wildlife. and I want nature to take its course and animals to have their chance in the wild. But it's not always a perfect scenario like that. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of tackle that subject, and that's what I did in that film.
I want to get into that more. I'm just thinking now, in the last week, this came up, and maybe a lot of people would have been aware about this discussion when they caught P-22, the famous mountain lion in California, and that was a discussion. I think they actually ended up having to put him down, didn't they? But there was a discussion about putting him in a sanctuary for a while.
Yeah, no, interesting you say that. Mountain lions don't tell the grizzly bears, but they're probably my favorite animal, and I've been following the P-22 story for a long time. And yeah, no, when they captured him, obviously he'd been doing some strange behavior. He had attacked.
Yeah. What a horrible state he was in.
He was just in a bad way. But yeah, so what's the right answer there? It's like, you got this cat that's not doing well. It's 13 years old, at the end of his life. He's obviously desperate and making some desperate decisions. Do you euthanize him, or do you put him in the sanctuary? And honestly, I was, in my little peer group, and people are asking, I was advocating for him being euthanized. I just can't imagine an animal that has lived in the wild for 13 years being put into a sanctuary of any sort. I just think it would have been torture for him. And I think they made the right decision. He had some massive health issues, had been hit by a car and injured. It was the right thing. It was the humane thing to do. And that cat, he in his 13 years had done so much for mountain lions, for people, for connectivity issues. I think that he made the world a better place. It was a life that made a huge difference.
For sure. And I was spending a bit of time back and forth to LA for a while, and that was the first time that I had come across P-22, and I went to two of them actually, to the P-22 Day, which was essentially to raise funds for the big crossover that has now been fully funded, and I'm not sure if they've actually broken ground on it. They may or may not, but it's going to be the largest flyover in the world. And I'd always been hesitant about the idea of creating too much of a character around an individual animal, when so much of conservation around the world is you have to take sometimes very hard decisions, a bit like the one that we've just talked about, for the betterment of the species rather than the individual, because that's landscape scale conservation. But it's difficult, and it's emotional, and it's a real challenge, particularly when you personify an individual character, an animal like that. And I'd never been a big fan of it being done. And then I saw how enthused people were and how much people cared because P-22 had become a character, that it made me shift my opinion. Whereas it's not necessarily the way to go all the time, but I could see the massive benefit in it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that exactly. I think that I've struggled with that same thing, but I've seen the power of those characters coming to life and people connecting to them on a deeper level that they just don't seem to connect at that landscape level, like you said. And I think that it's powerful. I think we just have to, as storytellers, be careful with how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, but most, people are generally pretty smart and they can figure it out. But just as long as you're careful and honest about it, I think that it's a really great way to connect, particularly to the people that don't already care. That's that recruitment level thing that you're trying to do all the time as a filmmaker, especially in the conservation spaces. How do we stop preaching to the choir and start talking to people who haven't heard the stories, who haven't connected? And I think that P-22 had that ability and did that, and brought a lot of people to the scene that would have never even thought about it twice.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get too deep into that, because we need this spans to the bear sanctuary that you have, and then the famous bear that people might know that you had for a while, and then your TV work. But where did it start for you? What does young Casey look like, and what were you doing?
Young Casey looks just like old Casey,
just with the gray beard
and a lot more
which I'm getting as well now. I noticed in the mirror the other day.
Yeah, and every day more and more for me, for sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot has not changed truly in spirit, for sure. I grew up in Montana, was born and raised here. And I was as soon as I could walk. I hear stories from my mom and dad that I was always curious and exploring the backyard. And we lived on the edge of town near the mountains, so I was always wandering out into the wild as soon as I could, and to the point where they're always trying to keep a leash on me. But I was always interested in these creatures, specifically that shared the space with me, and I can remember one of the first things was this muskrat that lived in this irrigation ditch that ran through my yard, and just I had learned at a young age that if I could be patient and watch, and I could move slightly closer, and I could, this creature, this neighbor would start to reveal itself more, and that became a bit of probably an obsession at that point, even young. I mean, this is like I'm talking 5 years old. And then I just having, like, for a lack of a better term, that constant resource of different creatures that would just be able to satiate that curiosity, right? And so it was
what a place to grow up with that kind of fascination and all of that on your doorstep.
Yeah, and and I think in retrospect, now that I'm a father, I've got 3 kids, young kids. I think one of the greatest things that was the fertilizer to who I am today was my parents never said no. They let me just do what I wanted to do. And as that passion grew bigger, even as I got into high school and considering going into university, they never said, they didn't try to turn me another direction. I wanted to work with animals since I was little, and they just always supported it and never said, "Oh no, you should be an attorney or a doctor or something." They just said, do
something sensible.
Yeah, do something that actually makes money. Yeah, and so it's
who wants to do that?
No, but in retrospect, I thank them every day for that, because I've lived a wonderful life. I've been doing what I do on a professional level for almost this is coming on 30 years, and it's not always been easy. And certainly the bank account hasn't always been full, but my heart has. And I think that's
well, there's a lot to be said
absolutely.
in that. There's a lot to be said in that, because this has come up on this show a few times, but there's a lot of people who live what is sadly a very empty life because they spend most of their lives working, doing something they don't want to do. So the only bit of their life they can fill with the the pure happiness and excitement, the things that make us tick, are outside of the working hours, which is, it's not that much of our lives if you really think about it.
It is sad. I hate to think about it.
Well, I don't, because I like you most of the time, apart from when I'm doing my tax return, which is normally minimal anyway, because of the kind of work we do. I'm doing things that I love doing, so I'm very fortunate that is also the case.
Yeah, it is awesome, and it's funny because I obviously have answered that question a lot, and it's funny to sit back and just kind of retrospect and think, hey, what? There's so many choices and so many paths and turns in the trail that I've kind of taken and never did, and here I am talking to you, and I look back on all the turns and choices that I made, and I don't regret any of them. And it's been a good life.
Yeah, I try and live by the idea that the only things, and not that I have many, but the only things that I've regretted are things that I haven't done, things that I kind of turned down that shouldn't have. But I've never regretted the positive decisions that I've made, because you just never know. And try and tell young Casey what the roadmap is of the life that led you to where you are now. It would be impossible.
It would be, yeah.
But clearly you've just been guided by passion.
Yeah.
It seems like to me.
I got to ask you, what's the number one thing that you wish that you would have done?
Oh, I don't know if we have enough time for that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard. I was actually just talking about this with a friend of mine who's actually also been on this podcast a bunch of times, talking about sharks, Sarah Roberts. And we were talking about how you often think as you're growing up that, I'm too old to make that change now. And then life goes on and 5 or 10 years passes and you look back and you're like, I could have easily done that. And I do remember a bit of a crossroad and a decision for me me thinking, I can't do this, I'm too far down the road, was in my early 20s. And I already finished my degree in economics, of all things. And I was spending a lot of time in Africa with amazing people, tranquilizing and darting elephants and collaring elephants and dehorning rhinos and doing all the cool things that young 20-year-old Byron wanted to be doing. Nothing related to my degree whatsoever. And I was seeing a lot of these wildlife vets jumping in and out of helicopters, just being badass and living the life that I was kind of hankering for. And I was thinking, I should have been a vet. And at that time, I thought, well, this is impossible. I'd have to go back and study for 5 or 6 years. But in hindsight, if I look back on that, I was like 22. I would have been done by the time I was 28 and doing the thing. So I think, I don't know if that's so much of a regret, because I wouldn't have done maybe a lot of the amazing things that I've done now. And I love storytelling and doing that through film and writing and photography. And I guess I wouldn't be doing that if I was a vet. But that was definitely a decision point that I had to say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I get it, man. I can remember times just being around vets like that and think, they are the wildlife cowboys, so to speak, right? And they're just like, they're always doing the coolest things. I agree.
Well, some of them are like, and I think this was the thing that I hadn't really thought about when I was like 16, making the decisions about what are you going to study at university, is that my experience of vets to that point were like, putting down a hamster or checking up on your dog. It wasn't catching mountain lions and darting elephants. And if I'd seen that at a younger age, there might have been a different path there, possibly.
Yeah. No. But here you are. You can't, like I said.
No, don't regret it at all. And now I'm sitting here talking to you. So what was your route through university then? So you were obviously very much, wildlife and being immersed in it has been there since you were a child. But what route did you take to get through that sort of formative educational years?
Yeah, not a non-traditional one, and one I don't like to tell the kids too often. But so I went to university to study wildlife biology, and then in the first year, that first summer, I was going to school in Bozeman at Montana State University, and so I was, a stone's throw away from Yellowstone National Park. So in the summer months, I was going down to Yellowstone and doing what I was good at, tracking bears and watching, looking for wildlife, and met a producer from Los Angeles who was just starting this big series. It was called Safari. It used to be on some obscure U.S. channel for years, but he was an LA guy, didn't have a whole lot of wildlife experience. I was a Montana kid who had a ton of wildlife experience, and I guess we became friends. And then he was always it started off, he was asking me like, hey, where do you think the grizzly bears are today, or have you seen anything interesting? I saw some river otters down the river or whatever. So he saw that I had some knowledge that was going to be beneficial to his production. And then that just morphed into, I was helping him do that. And then, soon enough, he could see that I could carry his 60-pound backpack to the top of the mountain and all his gear and find the grizzly bears for him. And so he started giving me, paying me a little money. So I kept coming around. And so I did that through that summer. I went back to school. And then even while I was in school, the next semester, he was, constantly teasing me with, hey, I'm back in the park, I'm filming this or that. And so I would,
and you're like, I got to study.
Yeah. So I was playing hooky and, running around doing that. Well, cut to like a year later, that series got a big uptick, and he had to deliver 52 half-hour episodes.
52?
Yeah. And
wow. In what space of time?
And he had in production time was going to be 2 years of time.
Still.
Yeah. So yeah, still. Yeah. And so, but it was worldwide. So then he just came to me and said, hey, I'd love you to be part of the series. We're going to be going to Africa, to India, South America. And, he's like, are you in? And I remember thinking to myself, well, I should probably think about it. Yes, no, I'm going.
How do you say no? Like, you just can't.
I couldn't. Yeah. So, and honestly, man, the bottom line is that I thought I can always go back to school. I can go do this. And I never came back. I on that series alone, I mean, I think I went from, doing everything I said, being a Sherpa and tracker to, he would have to go back to LA and I was going to be on location for another week. So, he taught me how to use the camera. So I would sit back and shoot. So then, that morphs into, you start doing a lot more camera work. And then, because I had a basic knowledge of the animals, I started helping writing. And then the next few projects that came down after the safari, I was helping to produce and come up with some of the concepts, and then being, boots on the ground plus camera work. So, but I was always behind the camera for years, and made fun of all the people in front of the camera mostly. Yeah, and so that's what I did until I was about 20, 26, 27. So, I mean, I was almost 10 years early because I started doing that when I was 18.
Wow. So you got the break and you just didn't stop.
Never stopped. Yeah. And it was...
and that what a turning point that, I mean, wow.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. You know how it is, man. It's like you get these... you feast or famine, right? When production was good, I was traveling, having fun, and then come back home and didn't have a shoot for months. And I was like, like a basic starving college kid at that point, really, but without being in college. And so, sometimes I'd move back home or find a little odd job here and there. And then some of the odd jobs I started finding that actually did start to morph who I am is I started working at wildlife parks. In Montana. Yeah, Montana. And, a lot of the work was just feeding animals, shoveling poop, doing stuff like that. But it still was in the wildlife realm. And I made it, it was an interesting connection because, back in those days, I look back in those days and I think they seemed like the Wild West because some of the things that we used to do. But, again, I was even then probably not a big fan of animals in captivity, but what I was learning, especially like tracking and stuff like that, like, I would go and clean it. Let's give it a kind of an example here. Like I'd clean a lynx cage, for example, a Canadian lynx cage. And when I'm in there shoveling its poop and feeding it every day, and then I'd go out in the field and I'd be walking around and I'd smell the smell that I smelled every day when I was cleaning that lynx. And I would say, hey, there's a lynx around here. And then sure enough, as I walked around and investigated more, I'd find a lynx track. And it was like, I started building like an olfactory catalog of animals because I was dealing with, and so it was starting to translate. And then even in behavior. So like the couple of the places I worked where, the animals were used for photography and stuff like that. So I would, you have hands-on, and you take the animals out. So you start to learn how these animals move. And then when I would go work on the productions, a lot of that stuff would translate and actually be advantageous to anticipating animal behavior, especially when you're doing camera work. So it was just a really weird kind of back and forth. The thing I was doing is I was doing still wildlife filmmaking and working at these wildlife parks. And I look back on that. I mean, that was my early 20s. It really did set a foundation to, who I am now. And I learned, there were some things back then I would say I'm not proud of. Certainly I was part of some organizations and companies that were terrible in retrospect.
In terms of,
just
for wildlife,
just exploitation of wildlife. I mean, a lot of these animals lived in, inadequate cages. And I mean, I was just telling my wife the other day, we did some crazy shit. I mean, I would take, I'm just give you an example. I mean, it's going to get in trouble for it now. But we would have a mountain lion in the back of a truck in a kind of a makeshift cage. And, a lot of times we would just drive these cats around and, put animals in the back of the truck. So they got used to being in the back of the truck because we were going to go from the location or to the facility to a location. We just wanted them to be used to being in the back of the vehicle. So we decided one day that we were going to go take a mountain lion for a ride down to where we're going to have lunch at this local little tavern in a small town in Montana. Well, on the way there, it's just this backcountry road, probably 20 miles long. And I remember it was in wintertime and there was this herd of mule deer on the side of the road. And the cat started perking up to it. And we got this great idea that we're just going to let this cat out and see what he can do. And we did. And, and this cat's like, this big kind of, fat captive cat that went after him and never had a chance to catch him. But he had such fun trying, it was like a toy to him, and we used to do stuff like that all the time because it was just kind of fun for the cats, fun for us to watch. But, I mean, obviously terribly illegal. There's lots of bad things about it, but as a kid in his early 20s, we didn't care. And there was no one around.
We all do stupid shit in our 20s.
And there were so many things like that. That was back in it was in the old days, man. It was just like, we just do all kinds of things like that. Animals would get loose. We're, looking for them all the time, tracking them down, trying to catch them. It was nuts.
So where did a lot of these? So I'm assuming that these, like the mountain lion, that was being used in some form of film production. But how did they end up getting to the parks in the first place, or is it a long catalog of orphan because of road accident and things like that?
Yeah, a lot of them were just products of the kind of captive breeding game, but also like the one mountain lion I just was explaining. This cat was actually an orphan from Arizona. His mother was shot and killed, and then we actually got him and his sister, and I actually raised him since he was a really tiny little spotted guy. So at that point, he was like a 1 or 2 year old little cat. Had a great relationship with that mountain lion. And inevitably, he actually ended up attacking me, and I've got some pretty good scars on my body from it. But
wow.
Yeah.
How did that come about? I mean, that seems like I know numerous stories of people who have worked with orphan big game, particularly predators in different parts of the world, where that happens eventually if you do enough of it.
It happens all the time. Yeah, no, I mean, this cat was 140 pounds of muscle. He was a pretty athletic cat, and I would take him on walks. Again, looking back on it, something I would never do today. But I would take him to just Forest Service land here, public land, in the back of that truck. I'd put him on a leash and I'd walk him down the trail, and then we'd get far enough away where I knew there would be no kids, dogs, or people, and I would just cut him off the leash, and he would just run around the forest, and I would just stay with him, and he'd vice versa, right? And so we were doing something similar, and I'd play a little bit of cat and mouse with him where I'd, again, kind of asking for it in retrospect, but, I would hide and he'd chase after me, and then he would run and hide and I would go after him. And then one day he just decided that he was, didn't like what I was doing, evidently. He just came over to me, and he was just, his eyes were kind of dilated and his ears were kind of flattened. And I immediately knew he had some weird thing in his mind going on. I just looked at him and said, no. And he jumped at me and tried to bite me in the throat. And I grabbed onto his throat to keep his mouth away from my neck. And he was fully clawed. So he dug his claws in and into me. And he was winning the match. He was pulling his own self.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And then so mountain lions and a lot of big cats, they do this next thing. If they can't bite you, he started to try to pull his back feet up and try to gut me.
Yeah, like at your guts.
And so that's what he started doing. But then, front paws in my shoulders, back paws coming up to rake. So he kind of lost leverage off the ground. And so he kind of twisted and fell to the ground. As soon as he hit the ground, he stopped. In fact, and then he stopped and then started purring. And I put the leash on him and just walked him back like a quarter mile back to the truck and loaded him up and looked down at my body, and I just was leaking.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I had to go to the hospital. And I remember walking in and they asked me what was wrong, and I said,
I took my mountain lion for a walk.
Exactly. And they thought I was nuts. Like I honestly think that they thought I was a crazy person. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's a lot of some of the foundational years of Casey Anderson that a lot of people don't know about. I mean, I've wrote a book about, and I've definitely touched on all this stuff because it, as much as my time in the wild as a filmmaker, especially in those early years, this other part of I would call it the dark side of some of my first years. It was as impressionable and as probably important as anything as who I am today.
Mm-hmm. So when did that kind of switch happen where you started to really question or have these big questions about wildlife and captivity and your role in facilitating some of that to the point where now you have your own sanctuary?
Yeah, it happened pretty distinctly. So I moved on to, continue doing a lot of filmmaking all over the world. And that, again, majority of what I was doing. And then I got this job kind of as it was title was a curator, but just making sure the animals were all healthy. And I was kind of the animal boss at this wildlife park in Idaho. And it was mostly bears, black bears and grizzly bears. And I just started to, as older I got, I started to, I guess, care about the business part of it all, and kind of, it was part of the meetings that were decisions were being made, and I could see that this didn't jive with what I believed in. I mean, I love the wild. That's what I grew up loving, and I see these animals, and I just see that they're not happy or not taken care of. But even worse, I mean, just the exploitation and the decisions for these animals' lives mostly made by how much money they could make somebody. And it came down to, I was like 25 years old, and this little bear cub was born at this facility. Actually, three little bear cubs were born at this facility, and this facility was full. Population was full. They didn't have no room for more bears. So that was their decision that they just needed to get rid of them. And if they couldn't find a place for them, they were going to euthanize them. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, they're allowing these bears to mate, and these cubs are being born. But, these little cubs, they wanted to keep the cubs around for that cute period where they would be an attractive thing for guests. But, no one wants to see that awkward next stage bear. They want to see either little kind of cute cubs or the big, massive bears. So their policy was, let's continue mating these bears and having these cubs, keep the cubs around, and then get rid of the cubs and then start over again. And I didn't want to be part of it. So
it's so sad. It's so much, like, that goes on way more than people realize.
It goes on way more. So much. It's shady. It's shady out there, man. I'll tell you for sure. 99% shady. And so I found homes for two of the cubs, and one of the cubs, again, I'd bottle raising these little guys and bonding with them. And I couldn't find, I decided that, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this cub and I'm going to start a sanctuary, and I'm going to try to do something right with, I know there's all these situations where there's these bears like this that have no place to go, both from being orphaned in the wild or orphaned from strange situations like this. And 26, I guess, years old, I had this grand idea. I was going to take this little bear cub, raise it.
It's bold.
Yeah. And build a sanctuary in Montana that rescues bears. And I think, and in retrospect, in retrospect to me, the idea was exactly that. And, I spent a lot of time in the wild and a lot of time around grizzly bears and a lot of time around people around grizzly bears, is that I knew that there was a need for education. And I thought, let's build a sanctuary in a place that people could stop by and see these cool bears, but most importantly, we can educate them about living and being around grizzly bears. And so that's what we did. And I look back and I see like today I see like 26-year-old kids walking around. I think, what? At the time I thought I was pretty smart, and
we all do.
But it worked out. I mean, it became something bigger than I ever thought.
Yeah, the Brutus was the name of that bear.
Yeah, right? Little Brutus. So I guess it's been 20 years ago now, or a little more, 21. So rescuing him, when I first saw him, he was about the size of a beer can, and bottle raised him. And then, by the time we were taking him to the next stage of his life, the sanctuary, he was, 100 pounds, and built this facility for him. In fact, the producer that I had been working with of all those years financed the place. He believed in the idea.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And and so we built the facility and then rescued two other bears shortly after that were 18 years old, that had been a product of the circus industry and lived in these little tiny cages for their entire lives of 18 years. One of them just died about a month ago, which is crazy. That bear lived to be 36 years old.
36.
And
wow.
38 years old. So crazy. I mean, at that point when we rescued these 18-year-old bears that live in these little 6x6 cages, we thought maybe they'd get a couple good years of running around a sanctuary and digging in the grass and swimming and stuff. But she got more than half her life to do that, which is, again, and it's just to see
That's incredible.
That bear, how elated those bears were to be able to be bears, and happy they were, and even a captive upgrade, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think that was one of those things. Bears in captivity, of all the species I've ever worked with, they tend to be pretty easy to take care of because they care about one thing mostly, and that's food. And it's if they've got everything that they want in that sense, often even the wild bears are wandering around because they're just looking for food. You can see that. This is a perfect example is the salmon rivers in Alaska. It's like, the salmons are in their home range turns to about 100 square feet. And I think, again, but there's still something that they're missing. And I'm rambling here, but yeah. And so Brutus was the first, and raising him and spending time with him and building this incredible bond with him. And I think that one of the most important things from that relationship was that, I was seeing things in an animal that when we hear about them, they're mostly because they've done something wrong. They've hurt somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And, this highly intelligent, emotional animal that I made a connection with. And it really started opening my eyes up as a growing filmmaker. Even it's like, there's so many more characteristics here to these animals that I think that we need to try to tell the stories of.
So was the sanctuary that you have set up, was that for bears that couldn't go back into the wild, or have you also taken on bears that the intention is that they would be released back and reintegrated into wild populations?
Yeah, all the bears that we have taken in at the sanctuary have all been bears that can't go back into the wild. They're usually orphaned too young, so they don't get to learn those skills that they need to learn from their mother in those first 3 years that they're with them. So all the bears that we found or we've rescued have been young bears that can't go back. And then honestly, the legal situation here in the States, particularly, even if you did try to rehab a bear and got to the point where it, you maybe taught it some skills, or it was to the point where it could go back out, liability wise, most fish wildlife parks or, U.S. fish wildlife agencies would not allow it anyway. So it's a dead end street. And once a bear is orphaned in the wild, it has two choices. And that is to try to beat the odds and survive without its mother and without learning any of those skills, or be euthanized or put in captivity, really. That's kind of what the original film we were talking about at the top of the podcast. It's really kind of explored that because, over the years since the sanctuary existed, a lot of those situations will come to me where there's this little bear in the woods without a mother, and everybody calls up Casey Anderson and says, "Hey, can you do something with this bear like you did with Brutus?" And I look at that situation, I'm like, give that guy a chance. And over the years, I've seen little bears that were orphaned way too early overcome the odds. And I've seen them in their second year, and I've seen them in their third year, and I've seen them become adult bears. And
and they have the wild.
In the wild. Yeah. And it's like nature took its course and created this animal who's probably super resilient and tough and smart. And that's why it's there. And I became, as time has gone on, I honestly hope my sanctuary goes extinct, and that we always are making the right choices for animals, and let nature take its course, but giving them a place in nature where they have the best chance possible. And I think that's the kind of where I'm at now, for sure.
What is in Modern Huntsman, we ran a story that Rob Green wrote 2 volumes ago called The Hand That Feeds. And it was all about grizzly bear and the grizzly bear human interface interaction, and where and how conflicts arise. And if I was to, this doesn't do justice to his incredibly well articulated article, but the major takeaway from that is that we need to be better educated in living in landscapes that grizzly bears also exist in. That was the takeaway from the story. How are you seeing that change over the period of time that you've been where you are in Montana? Because you're right at the cusp of it in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And the first grizzly that I ever saw was up in Tom Minor Basin 2 or 3 years ago. But you have it right on your doorstep there, obviously.
Literally, sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it waxes and wanes. It's a funny thing. I think that sentiment is right. I think that in order for humans and grizzly bears to coexist, it's going to take a lot of education, um, for humans to really understand who these animals are and how to live with them and why they're making decisions that they're making and what we can do to help them make better decisions, I guess, at some level. Um, and through filmmaking, honestly, I mean, a lot of films have come out, and I think that people are learning things about bears, and oh, I didn't know I should put my bird feeder away in the autumn months. Now I do, and I want to help the bears out, so they do. So I think there's a lot of films out there that are teaching these things, and I know we've done a bunch of them over the years. And as Brutus, as an ambassador to that, and it has educated the people, and they are making the right decisions. I think there's a lot of outreach things going on through NGOs and other organizations that are really trying to reach out to kids and stuff on a basic level here to what it is like to live with bears and what we should and shouldn't do. And I think inevitably it's about fear. As it is with many animals, whether white sharks or lions or anything. Why would you care or want to take care of an animal that you're afraid of? And being not understanding something often, because it's simply easy to fear something if you don't understand it.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just trying to help people understand, particularly the grizzly bear, and especially in this area. And I see, where the people come around and there's these big movements to, put in a whole bunch of bear-proof trash containers and things like that to help the bears not make bad choices. But then, one bear attacks somebody because they've, accidentally came around a corner, got too close. And then you see the community kind of go back into that fear mode again. And then, it's up to us to kind of try to help them understand, why that bear did what it did, and then kind of regain their confidence back so that they're not making choices out of fear. And it just kind of goes back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, and I suppose the same to some extent applies to wolves as well. And then there's the interaction that is not just sort of Joe Public, but agricultural interest. I know that there's a big or can be a big conflict there as well. Have you had much to do with sort of trying to mitigate some of those issues?
Constantly. That's really who my life has evolved into that more than anything lately. Yeah, especially having little kids here now, growing up, I'm a little more at home a little bit more and more interested in diving deeper into the community issues at large. And again, I live in one of the coolest places on the planet, on the edge of Yellowstone here. So the wolves, the bears, or mountain lions are all issues that the community is talking about all the time. And I grew up in Montana, and half my family are cattle ranchers. So I've grew up listening and hearing their perspective and understanding their perspective. But also I listen and hear the other side is equally as much. So I do find myself often trying to be a bit of a mediator.
Yeah.
There's some extremists on both sides that I think that are not helping anybody, and certainly not the wildlife.
It never does.
Never does. Yeah. So, I empathize with both sides, and I try to bring them to the table. And, and it's something I've been doing a lot of. And again, even if I watch my meter, I go back and forth a little bit. I mean, I'm not very little, right? But I will kind of say, yeah, the ranchers, they are stewards of these wide open landscapes that harbor so many different other wildlife. And what's the alternative to these ranches going under development and housing? That's particularly around Bozeman right now. And it's crazy. So it's like, I want to figure out ways that, how can these ranches become sustainable? But also their mindset isn't, I hate every predator. But you see that, particularly, you mentioned Tom Miner Basin, really good friends of mine up there, the Anderson family. I mean, I know. Yeah, I mean, they've been around forever, and their mindset has changed. I call them they're the Renaissance ranchers, as I like to call them, and and their ways of living with predators is working. And I think that when their peers, the other ranchers in the area, see that, especially these new generations that are taking over the ranches from their kind of old school narrow mindset people that they might have, they're trying some of these things. And so I think that now we just, as a community, have to celebrate that and support it. And because inevitably we want them to be, these ranches to be around. And how wonderful would it be if we can have these big wide open places that are sustainable and they love predators too. And yeah, I think that we got to find out what that compromise is that makes it work. And that might be, again, I'm not anti-hunting predator because of that. I mean, I think that if there's a management tool that the community as a whole can sign up for, and it's based in science, and not crazy fanatic passion, then we can find that, and if, some people, if the ranchers feel like, we're going to kill 5 wolves, that's the quota currently north of the Yellowstone Park, instead of 25 as they did last year, and they're okay with that. And then the other side, the wolf people are like, okay, yeah, we can still have our livelihood too, and it's not going to impact the wolves too much either. Then it's a win-win, right? And I think that we haven't found that balance yet. We're trying. No. And I think that, I'm short answer to what you asked. I'm heavily involved in all those situations, and I'm certainly reaching across the fence, so to speak, and trying to bring people together and find a common ground. It's tough, man. It might be one of the toughest things I've ever done.
It is tough because, the kind of pragmatic approach and opinion that you just expressed there from somebody whose entire life has been deeply rooted in caring and understanding wildlife is not very common. It does tend to be either position, either protect everything or let's kill everything that's threatening my livelihood. And there's an increasing amount of it, but it's probably slightly distorted by those are the kind of people that I hang around and have conversations with. So I'm not sure if that's actually moving in that direction, or if it's just the world that I move in. But it is frustrating that more people and organizations can't come to the table and be okay with them not getting 100% of everything that they want. And instead, and this goes back to like what we were mentioning right at the start, looking at the bigger picture of the species as a whole and conservation landscape scale, leaning where we can on the science that we have and trying to make best decisions around that, but also understand that people live in the landscape and we want to live. I think all society wants to live in a landscape that also has nature around it and in it, because I think we're learning more and certainly understanding. I mean, I think people live in the countryside have understood this for a long time, but certainly it's being more publicized, and people in urban areas are understanding more that we gain so much more as humans, and it's healthier for us to be in environments that are integrated in nature. But that is difficult.
Definitely, it's a tough one. It's I'm hopeful. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I guess that. But at the same time, there's times that I've certainly put my head in my hands and think, will my kids have wolves and bears and mountain lions like I got to as I grew up in Montana? And you got to keep going. You got to keep trying, I think. And I'm hopeful. I mean, I've been interacting with a lot of younger generations, particularly in the ranching community, and they're open-minded and they listen.
You're seeing a shift.
I see it. I see a shift. Old guard. Yeah, there's a shift, and even in the old guard, I think you can teach old dogs new tricks, and I think that there's some value in if I walk up to a rancher and say I'm a 5th generation Montanan, that means something to them.
Yep.
And I grew up hunting, and I've been like I said, my family are cattle ranchers, so now at least I'm coming from a position that I actually understand a lot of what part of their lives. But I have some other perspectives. And if I can, say, hey, I'm on your team, but here, listen to this stuff. And this, this is what the other side's doing, is what they're saying. And here's the facts. right? I've seen people change a little bit. I've certainly, especially with grizzly bears, I've had people come up to me and say, I've watched your show and learned a lot more about grizzly bears. And, now that I know the intelligent, amazing animals they are, I give them a chance on my ranch.
That's great.
So it's great to hear those kind of like very tangible shifts.
Well, I have to say that Montana and where you are is a place that is very deeply seated in my heart. And I didn't get back this year, and I was feeling the withdrawal of not being on the edge of Yellowstone and around in that area, because it truly is it's a beautiful place, and so fortunate to have big predators around you, and a landscape that is complicated, but has achieved so much in the last few decades.
It really has. It's having traveled the world and seen a lot of other amazing places. You take home for granted sometimes, but when I come back home, I just
easily
I think to myself, this is one of the most wonderful places on the planet, if not the most wonderful place on the planet. And I get to call it home, and I get to raise my family here, and lucky. It's but it doesn't come without hard work, I think, and from a lot of people, and in order for it to stick around, it's going to just continue. That continued hard work is going to have to happen.
For sure, yeah. And I think you brought this up 10, 15 minutes ago. The thing that does, and not just, I mean, I've seen it in the last 5 years around Bozeman and Montana at a crazy rate, but is true in many parts of the world, is that the shift in land use through development is happening seemingly more rapidly, and is a greater threat to wildlife than the tussle of interactions between farmers and predators, I would say.
100%. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I've been trying, again, when you're talking to all these people, all the stakeholders, so to speak, it isn't about that. It's not about ranchers versus predators. That's minute into the scheme of things. What we all don't want is these big landscapes to go away. And here's a little anecdotal thing. I wrote this down the other day because I thought it was so powerful. I have a little girl, a 4-year-old, who loves the outdoors. And she's, I can't keep her out of it enough, and reminds me of probably a small 4-year-old me. And we climb up to the top of this mountain just out my back door that overlooks Paradise Valley. And we do it all the time. And in the last 4 years, we go up to this old Native American cairn. It's kind of our church up there. That's where we like to go. And it's got this incredible view. And after the last 4 years, I have certainly noticed the valley change from that perspective up there. And so the other day, we went up kind of late in the evening, and we were up there. The lights were started coming on down the valley below. And my little girl just looks at me and goes, "Wow, look at all the fireflies." And I just thought to myself, yeah, I didn't have the heart.
That's so sad.
I know. It's so sad.
It's breaking my heart.
And I just thought to myself, I didn't have the heart to tell her they were not fireflies. But, in that moment, there was an obvious increase of quote unquote fireflies that we had, hadn't been seeing just a year before. Mm-hmm. And, as Paradise Valley's changing. And
I love Paradise Valley. It's beautiful there.
Yeah, but it's just, and it is, in the end, it's these small family ranches just can't sustain themselves anymore. And they, when a developer comes in and goes, "Hey, I'll give you enough money that your kids and your grandkids will be fine for the rest of their lives."
Of course you're going to say yes. Of course you are. Yeah. So what projects do you have on the go now that you can tell me about that you're working on?
That I can tell you about?
Yeah, I'm sure like most people who do this kind of work and working in film and stuff, there's normally a host of that I normally get to hear about after we start recording.
Yeah, I can tell you about
one. You can tell the world about.
I can tell you about one that I'm really digging lately. We kind of have been talking about local politics and captive animals more than anything, and that's. But yeah, I'm still a filmmaker. Yeah, and one that I'm doing right now that I really have enjoyed is a series called The Tracker's Diary. And basically it's like the most simplistic film, kind of old school. It's basically a kind of a journal type film of me going out in the woods, and it's just literally like it's a little bit of like a making of or behind the scenes kind of feel to it, but also we have we are bringing our big cameras and capturing really cool behavior. But yeah, we just been going to cool locations and kind of embedding small teams, getting some really great behavior. But we also kind of turn our camera back on ourselves a bit and just like just to see what it takes to do a lot of these things.
Yeah, I like that because I think a lot of people don't. We've started to appreciate it, or the public have started to appreciate it more in the last few years when they've started to release like behind the scenes of Our Planet and that one sort of 1 hour special. But prior to that, you often didn't see or hear at all from the filmmakers who are spending months or sometimes years in the field to capture these unique behaviors.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a bit of essence of that. That's my my foundations and my passion. I love going out and just tracking and finding animals, and then obviously witnessing cool behavior that's never been filmed before, or even has, but just a different perspective. And so we did a series. Big first part of that series was up in Katmai, where we spent a ton of time with bears and had incredible interactions and witnessed amazing things, and lived with the bears for almost a month. Wow. Yeah, and that's going to move. We're going to do things from the Grand Canyon to the Everglades. We're going to be going across. We're doing the Okavango Delta, going into Nepal.
Oh, right. So it's going to be global.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man. So is it have you started to release it yet?
Yeah.
Or is this an ongoing?
The first round, the Katmai. So yeah, Tracker's Diary Katmai is out. It's on Curiosity Stream. And there's
a lot of stuff seems to be on that now, but I hadn't heard of it until about 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, Curiosity Stream's great because it's just like they've got like 23 million subscribers worldwide. It's very, it's all science, history, or natural history, kind of animal behavior based stuff. So Netflix, natural history Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got some real. It's just I hate to use the term, but it's true. Smart TV. It's just very smart TV, and a lot of it's like ours are only 25-minute little episodes, but it's just that's most people don't have that much time anyway to watch TV anymore. Yeah. So yeah, it's been that's been a really fun. Like I would call it I hate to call it a side project because we love it as much as any of the big projects, and we're of course still doing some blue chip stuff. Big long term stuff. In fact, I could probably give you a slight nod at one of your past guests, but I'm working on collaboration with Ben Masters on some stuff.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And some real big blue chip, exciting, never shot before behavior stuff in the mountain lion world, which is like I said.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're, that's pretty exciting.
You certainly got into some heated debate about mountain lions recently. He came on the podcast and talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, no, he loves, he's a big cat guy. He loves cats. And
absolutely.
And we share a lot of passions, and we have some resources. Each of us have, things that we can bring to the table that, 1 + 1 = 3 kind of a scenario. So we're doing some cool stuff here in the next
year. Tremaine. Well, that is exciting because, he's an incredible person, and the stuff that they've deep in the heart. And I was actually just with Austin Alvarado, one of his cinematographers, for a bunch of time in Big Bend, because we've just made it's on the cutting floor right now. We made a short documentary about him and black bears. So that's really exciting. Fantastic.
Yeah. No. So, and there's all kinds of other stuff brewing, and we'll see. But it's been Vision Talks, starting the production company, I guess, would it be now 8 years ago, 7 years ago. Never thought I would do it, did it. And we're still around. I think when you're talking about wildlife production companies, particularly, if you're still around, you're doing something.
Yeah, no, for sure. Otherwise it doesn't last. There's a lot of people would love to do it, but making it actually work is incredibly difficult. If people want to follow what you're up to, Casey, is there where should people do that? I noticed that you have is your podcast quite regular? I think you had 7 or 8 episodes on that. as it stands right now?
Yeah, so my podcast, it took a bit of a hiatus, but we're kicking it back up. Currently, it's called Sidetracked with Casey Anderson. It may, you can find it at Sidetracked with Casey Anderson. It may change its title, but it'll still be in that same location. So that's a good place to keep up. And then, all the social media stuff. So Instagram's @GrizzlyGuy. I try to keep that populated as much as possible. I have my Facebook page. That's super interactive. I think it's called it's @GrizzGuy, my Facebook page. But you should be able to find it just by searching Casey Anderson. But we keep everybody up to date as much as we can on the social media stuff. And then, of course, there's a couple of websites, visionhawkfilms.com and caseyanderson.tv. And either of those we're always posting new videos and stuff and keeping everybody up to date on what we're up to.
Casey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I will try and make a point of letting you know way ahead of time when I'm going to be over in Montana next time, so that we can have a beer together and talk more. Because it would be, I think we by the sounds of it, we probably have quite a few mutual friends as well. So that would be great.
Yeah, no, please do. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. And when you're in Montana, let's hang out. Let's go tracking some bears and hang out. And I'm sure we got hours of stuff we could talk about.
I don't need to be asked twice. I haven't spent a lot of time with bears at all. Pick any species on the continent of Africa, a lot of time there. But bears is just something I'm fascinated by, but don't know a hell of a lot about. And so I will invite myself to that invite at some point in the future for sure, to spend some time in the field with you.
Well, I look forward to it. Let's make it happen.
Cheers, Casey.